Good evening, it's Logan Albright here with another book review for your viewing pleasure, and today we're doing the novel Light in August by William Faulkner. Now, I haven't read William Faulkner before. Well, that's not exactly true. I read a short novel by him, which I didn't really get anything out of, but I wanted to read one of his more famous novels, something he was more well known for, because I heard he was good, and it's a gap in my literary education. So I decided to read Light in August. It's reportedly one of his more accessible books, a good way, a jumping off point to learn about his writing style. So that's what I read, and here's what I thought about it. Faulkner's got a unique style, I think. He's very American. He takes a lot of liberties with his spelling and punctuation and sentence structure, so it can be a little bit difficult to read at times. Some of the way he phrases things are a little bit hard to follow. I had to read some passages 2 or 3 times to really understand fully what he was getting at, but I do think he's a very good writer, and I like his style. His style has been described as Southern Gothic, which I think is very appropriate. There's a lot of similarities in a way to people like Poe, other Gothic writers, but it's very American, you know. It's not that kind of British Gothic with castles and ghosts and things like that, but there's this kind of spookiness about the American South. Faulkner was from Mississippi. This novel takes place largely in Mississippi, and there is kind of a spookiness and a grimness about it. Very atmospheric, and I think that the term Southern Gothic is very appropriate to the kind of writing that he does. His storytelling style is pretty interesting. He takes a very non-linear approach to storytelling, and he also plays around with different viewpoints. Quentin Tarantino, the film director, has talked about how he caught a lot of flack early on for his films being non-linear and jumping around, and he said, you know, well, novelists have been doing this for centuries. Why is it a big deal when you do it in film? And I have to think that he might have been thinking of Faulkner when he was talking about this, because this novel jumps around like crazy. It goes back in time. It goes to different viewpoints. And not only does it go to different viewpoints, but the different viewpoints are written very differently. You really get a sense of the different characters' personalities when you see the chapters that are written from their points of view. He really embodies the characters and the situations in those points of view. So you have flashbacks that are very hazy and disconnected. You have memories that are kind of all over the place. And I think he does a good job of capturing the way that the mind works, especially the subconscious. There's a lot of dreamlike imagery. There's a lot of jumping around and kind of disconnected thoughts that are only vaguely related to each other by these thin strands. And I think that's a lot of the way the mind actually works. And it can be hard to read, but I think it really is evocative of the way that people think, especially when they're not thinking particularly clearly. So stylistically, I found it a really interesting book and enjoyed that. The plot of the book, there's actually not that much of a plot. It's a pretty thin plot. It's mainly focused on characters and on style. The plot revolves around a woman who becomes impregnated by someone who's not her husband, and he runs off and she has to go find him in the town of Jefferson, Mississippi. And while she's there, there is a murder, and there's a search to try to find the murderer, and there's a lot to do with lynching, and that's basically the entire plot of the story. It's really not a story-heavy book. It's very much more focused on just broader themes, I would say. One of the themes is very anti-racism. This was written in the 1930s, 1932 in fact, in Mississippi, and it takes place in the 20s, I believe. It seems to be during Prohibition in Mississippi, and there's a lot of talk about race, and actually it's pretty shocking to read from a modern perspective. There's a lot of racial slurs that occur in this book that would be very controversial if it were written today, and I can see why people would have a problem with that, and for me it was pretty shocking to read, I'll be honest, but I think it's really important that he was allowed to write that way, and I think that, not to get too political, but kind of trying to eliminate that kind of writing from our language, I think, is a real mistake, because it really did show in very stark terms what it was like in 1920s Mississippi for black people, and I think it was, it was shocking and horrible, and we should know that it was shocking and horrible. We shouldn't be have this idea that everything was okay, and so the way he writes, I think, is very honest, and I think it really kind of brings home, particularly now in the 21st century, it brings home how bad things were back then if you happened to be black, and how few rights you had, even though, slavery had ended 60 years earlier. It's pretty rough times. So I think that's important. Another theme of the book, I think, is very critical of religion, which is interesting, and I enjoyed that as well. It talks about how kind of religious fervor can lead people to do horrible things. So that's one of the themes. Another theme of the book is love. And he doesn't have a very positive romantic view of love. He's got a very kind of bleak view of love. He talks about the despair of love. There's one character who said he was fortunate enough to grow old without the despair of love. So these are the kind of themes that go through the book, more so than strict plot and things happening. Things happening to the characters is less important than the characters themselves and what goes on inside their heads. The tone of the book is fairly bleak and pessimistic. I usually am not a fan of those kind of books. I'm an optimistic person myself. I like books that are hopeful and heroic and joyful. This is not those things, but it is very vivid. I like the title Light in August. I think that's a very vivid title, and it's mirrored in the type of writing that's in the book. But yeah, there's a lot of sadness going on, a lot of bleakness, a lot of desperation in the book. And as I said, he's got a negative view of love for the most part, and it shows kind of how it can destroy people and how it can lead people to do things that are desperately wrong for their lives. So, pretty rough, but I actually really enjoyed the book, and I wouldn't think I would, because I usually don't like this kind of nihilistic. I wouldn't say it's nihilistic. Nihilistic is too far, but I usually don't like these kind of bleak books. I usually like something a little more positive. But I think his writing is really good, and he touched me in an emotional way. So I would recommend William Faulkner, Light in August. I'm interested. I didn't get into my edition of the book, but I'll do that now. So, of course, my Library of America edition of William Faulkner. It's got 4 novels here. As I Lay Dying, Sanctuary, Light in August, and Pylon. I've only read Light in August so far, but I plan to read the rest. It goes up on my shelf back here with all my other Library of America books you can see. So I'm excited to read it, and the cool thing about the Library of America books, they come in these black dust jackets, right? But peeking inside, you always get a surprise, because you never know what color the book is going to be. This book is a beautiful burgundy red. Isn't that nice? A lot of my other ones up there are blue or green or other colors, but you never know until you get the book. So I was pleased with my first real encounter with William Faulkner. I intend to read more in the future, and I'm glad to have filled this hole in my literary knowledge. As I've said before on this channel, I tend to gravitate towards British and European authors more so than American ones. I think Faulkner's got a uniquely American style. It is very American, you can feel it, and I really appreciated it. So I'm glad I was able to fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge of American literature with Faulkner. I'll be reading more in the future, and I hope that this has been helpful for those of you out there trying to decide whether you want to read Faulkner or not. I urge you to give it a shot. I think you'll enjoy it. Until next time, I've been Logan Albright. Thank you so much for watching. If you have anything to say, please leave it in the comments. I would be grateful if you would like and subscribe the video, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.